You are an N of one, founder and CEO of Strategy of Security.
It wasn't like I was going to go be a poet. Right? This is probably my last job.
How do you know something has gone viral?
I mean, one example, like when Nikesh Arora chimes in, when you're out there on your own trying to cover the industry with a broad mandate, I realized what I didn't know. This is how complex our industry is. I want you to know that. Let me just give you a tool to help you navigate that complexity.
You write with the same level of clarity as an outsider, with the brutality of like a grand chess master.
There's a fine line between being critical and being honest. The only way to be good at strategy is to be brutally honest.
I want to talk about the state of the union for cybersecurity media.
I think in some ways it's never been better and never been worse.
My sense is a lot of it is pay for play. Do you think these hefty fees are sustainable in the age of AI?
I mean, is their business going to grow like wildfire? I don't think so.
You're not in this ambulance chasing mode.
I have a pretty high bar for quality in general.
What class of companies will die because of AI?
I think if you just had then I think you're probably in trouble.
What's the next big thing that is dropping from Grolmus?
Sleep.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cole Grolmus, founder and CEO of Strategy of Security.
Cole Grolmus, thank you for joining me on this interview series, Noise to Signal. You are an N of one. There is no one like you in cybersecurity media. You are a student of cybersecurity companies and the ecosystem. You study them, you research them, and you influence them through your writing. You are an army of one and a founder and CEO of Strategy of Security. And your work requires a lot of effort, but you make it seem like it's effortless. And my sense is it must have taken a lot of effort to get where you are today. So I'm curious, what has been the journey like to get started with Strategy of Security?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Honored to be here. I've been doing this for 5 years, but it's been 20 plus years in the making, right? I think there are parts of this journey that I could trace, all the way back to when I started using computers at 12, and for sure when I started working, and having a chance to work in the industry like at a fairly young age. But, I think what ultimately came together was like the culmination of that journey over a really long period of time, and a lot of really intentional thought around, what is it that I'm good at? What is a unique point of view that I can bring to the industry, and what feels very like natural to me.
And there is one thing I want to add. You have been doing this despite lack of sleep. You just had a second kid, so congratulations on that. Despite that, you've been doing amazing work. Your writing is really amazing. And my sense is like this is not your first rodeo. You tried something else, you failed, and then you landed up on Strategy of Security. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I did a run, after my time at PwC. Like I spent, a decade plus, call it intern through, director at PwC, mostly in the cybersecurity advisory practice. And the reason I left was not to do this. It was to start a proper startup. There was a long period of time where I always thought that I wanted to be, a proper founder like you, and had to give it a go. It was just one of those things that I could never make it to the end of my life and feel like I hadn't attempted that. And so did that kind of, the short of that was like a couple-year run, really giving that a go. Tried to build AI agents before we had nomenclature for that. And, this was like, more than 5 years ago. We just didn't really have the tooling. But, we were kind of at the stage of like, I got my OpenAI Playground API key from Greg Brockman personally. Like that's how early we were in attempting to do some of that. And it just, it kind of ended up being a little bit too early, and kind of ultimately like the wrong time of my life. But all this is to say that didn't work out, or I kind of decided that I didn't want to do that anymore after a couple-year run. But what that led to was like some really good reflection around what it was that I wanted to do next. And I think that's kind of the important part that got me to what I've been doing with Strategy of Security. being a founder is really hard. I have a ton of respect for, startup founders that are trying to build venture scale companies. I just kind of realized that I didn't want to do that. That's a hard realization, and it took a lot of pain to get to that point. But I reached a point of acceptance where it was like, it's not really for me. It's not what I want to do. But that doesn't mean that I have to go get a job either. Like, I was in a fortunate spot where I could take some time and figure out what I wanted to do next. And so I took the better part of a summer, wrote 65,000 words, which for a point of reference is like half a book.
Were those words for yourself, or were you writing it for public consumption on like
No,
Substack?
that was totally for me. It was all, I mean, I'm like, you gotta remember, I'm like sitting on by far the biggest failure of my life. Right. And I just ripped it all down to the studs. And I was like, what went wrong? What do I really like? What do I want to do more of? What do I want to do less of? What am I good at? What am I bad at? All of the above. Right. And as it turns out, like through very intentional exploration through all of that, I kind of reached something that was really close to this. I knew that it was directionally like, I'm decent at writing. I have an MBA. I've been through formal strategy training. I've 10 years of experience as a practitioner in like a hard knocks PhD enterprise environment like PwC. Like there are a lot of things that are commercially useful. Like it wasn't like I was going to go be a poet, right? So I wouldn't have been good at that. And so it was kind of just like, hey, there are enough things that came together that are actually commercially interesting as an independent business. And by the way, I picked up a lot of skills along the way to help me fend for myself as a founder. And so there's just enough things that I'm good at in that area that are what you see today, that I felt like it was something I had to do. And so that was the plan for me to come up with, what is it that I could do for the next 10 plus years? Like that was my objective starting out. I wasn't ready to commit to forever yet, but it was, what can I do for a while and give this a run? And that was this. So I would say now this is probably my last job. Like after having done this for 5 years and enjoyed the process and gotten some validation, like I don't want to do anything else. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
There are two follow-up questions I have. One is, like the early days when you got the API key from the OpenAI founder, that was probably the worst time to be a founder because things were changing so fast. Every day, every week, there was a new paradigm on how to build stuff. First it was RAG, and then there was vector search, and then there was something else. And now it is, now I guess it is settling on the agentic AI wave. The second question I had for you was, what were the lessons learned from that journey? Writing that 65,000 novel, like deep introspection. What were some of the lessons learned from your point of view in terms of getting to strategy of security?
Yeah, the answer to those, or at least my answer to those two things, might be closer together than what you might think. We were probably even for some of the tooling that you were talking about, right? And this is like 2018, 2019, 2020. So yes, it was a bad time. Little did we know when we left the firm, like we were heading into a pandemic, which, I don't want to place blame there. I mean, that wasn't what caused this. It just didn't help. Um, but I think we were in a time where like way pre-ChatGPT, like LLMs barely worked at that point. I mean, you could go into the playground and you could get like sort of a response, but not really. I mean, so what we were trying to build never was really around that. We were kind of back in the, pandas and proper machine learning and a lot of things like that, trying to build an agent. So it was pretty primitive. So I guess I would say the timing of that definitely mattered. We didn't know at the time that all this other tech was going to come together, but I would say if I were trying to build this today, it would look a lot more sane. It would be a lot easier to do, and all of that. So that definitely would have helped. But I think what I learned along the way though was like starting a startup, or really any business, but especially a startup, is like incredibly hard. I mean, the odds are just stacked against you from
Yeah.
the beginning.
Yep.
Even if you have everything working in your favor, right? And I think at the time, what I had to admit, I didn't know going in, or wasn't willing to admit going in, but what I had to acknowledge was there were too many parts of that job that I didn't have the skill set for. Like I mean, yes, I went to business school and management information systems, but like I'm not really a good programmer. Like, I know what I want to build. I'm not really a good programmer. So it was, it was hard for me. Could I write code? Did it look respectable? Sure. But it definitely wasn't an advantage. It was sort of mitigating a disadvantage at the time. And there, I don't know, there were just kind of enough other parts about the founder journey that I wasn't really suited for. And so it didn't really work. And we were building outside of cybersecurity. Like that's worth noting too. Like it was a little bit adjacent to what we had done at PwC. So it wasn't completely bananas, but like I was also, so a person who's not really that good at writing code working in a domain that is not my core domain. Like you can look at that in hindsight and be like, oh, well, that probably wasn't a good idea. And you would be right. So, I think it's a little bit different now. I mean, I can fend a lot better for myself with AI coding assistants and all the luxuries that we have today. But I think like that was one of the big lessons on the way out for me was look like it's hard to do this anyway. You have to align everything you possibly can, like layers upon layers of strengths, and do what is like very natural to you in order to have a chance at being successful.
I agree. Yeah, I mean it's very hard. There are so many. You don't realize how many functions you have to take on as a founder to scale the company, and every space is something that you've not worked on. There are a lot of spaces that you've never had to touch upon, and then there are nobody else to help you out. You just have to do it yourself. The thing I want to touch upon is one of your greatest contributions is the mapping of the cybersecurity ecosystem, and I say that because as founders, you're always struggling to figure out which category we belong in. And there are new categories coming up every now and then, right? Gartner comes out with a category, Forrester comes out with a category, and then you try to figure out which category we belong in, which categories don't belong in, and so on and so forth. And you went in and you did a deep dive in terms of mapping out the ecosystem so that even if you're not like very attuned to the market, you can figure out what is the lay of the land and figure out where you fit. So talk us through your journey through one of your most viral posts, I believe. I think it draws more traffic to your website even today compared to all the other writings that you do. What were you thinking in those days? Why did you write that piece?
So this is, kind of early. I started strategy security like end of summer, fall 2021, after my time off or my exploration time. What I quickly realized, again, with a heavy dose of humility, walking into this project and, with some confidence, but trying to rebuild my own confidence in many ways, if I were to admit that, I realized what I didn't know, right? Like, even after doing cybersecurity very professionally at PwC, one of the top consulting firms in the world for over a decade, when you're out there on your own trying to cover the industry with a broad mandate, I realized what I didn't know. And so all the things you just described about the challenges of navigating and mapping the cybersecurity industry were like what I realized. And so I made that for myself. Like the plan was always to publish it, right? But at the time, I had the freedom to sit there and like actually put all this together. And it was largely for my own ability to navigate the industry, or at least like quickly orient myself to wherever a certain company or wherever a certain topic was in the industry. But ended up publishing it, and that was definitely one of my first, probably fair to say, my first big hit for sure. I mean, I had written some other things, but at that point it was very early days, like hundreds of readers, type of a thing. This has really turned into more of a project. Like it was a post, but I would say that the ecosystem itself has lived, far and wide beyond the original post. And it's in some ways kind of like a canonical reference now in the industry.
I'm curious, was this intended to do a very small subset of the industry you wanted to take on? Then as soon as you dived into that topic, you realize it's way bigger than that? Or did you always intend to make it like a mapping of the entire ecosystem?
It was more of the latter. I knew enough for sure to realize how broad the industry was. And I think one of the core insights looking at it in retrospect that I was right about walking in is like, I have always had the point of view dating early in my career that like you need a balance of business and technical things. Like there's especially like cybersecurity is a very technical industry, and like that tends to be valued. I have always been pretty evenly split, between the two, or at least having more of a business background than what many folks in the industry do. I've just always been empathetic towards that side of it, right? And one of the things that I knew walking into that was, hey, I think people are kind of looking at cybersecurity like this, like pure play cybersecurity, but like in reality, there's this entire ecosystem around it, especially if you were to go to, you know, capital markets, venture capital, private equity, all of that. Like, I mean, even equity analysts who cover the industry, or, within the industry, you have all kinds of GTM people and other functions of people who work within the industry, but they may not call themselves like cybersecurity people per se. And I just felt like that needed some recognition, because that's a major part of the industry. Like, I've never actually run the data behind that, but if you were to look at the number of people sitting in each of those camps, like very technical, employed by, cybersecurity professional would recognize themselves as such, versus another discipline that happens to be working in cybersecurity, there's tons of those people. I just felt like that was that all comprehensively needed to be accounted for. And so I was trying to go like both really wide and fairly deep. And that's why, in some ways this thing is as gnarly and as overwhelming as it looks, is because that was on purpose. It was not to try to abstract away the complexity. It was to actually say, hey, like, this is how complex our industry is. I want you to know that. Let me just give you a tool to help you navigate that complexity.
And it seems like you have this natural tendency or a natural pull towards a good strategy. Once you see a good strategy, you get naturally drawn to it. I believe you wrote about the one password blue ocean strategy, and I think that even that went viral. Right? And you study all these companies. When you see a good strategy, you just latch onto it and you write really well about that strategy. So I'm curious, like, how did that play out? The blue ocean strategy from one password. I believe, that was one of your viral posts as well.
Yeah, that was probably the second really big hit. So that I that one I sat down and probably wrote over the course of, I don't know, 60 hours over a couple of weeks in the frozen tundra of February in Minnesota in early 2022. It was, I don't know, it was just I'm very much a student of strategy. I mean, again, that was like my emphasis in MBA school, along with like the technology side of that, and kind of even back to undergrad. So I've always cared a lot about strategy. That's one of the main orientations of what I like to write about. I just think 1Password is a fascinating business, right? I mean, again, this is like fresh off of their Series C. But long story short, you've got a company that's been around at the time for like 15 plus years. You had hardly raised any capital and was at hundreds of millions of dollars of business, and had a very unique brand, just a very unique story in the industry in general. And so I felt like it was very undercovered. And the funny thing is, I find this all the time now. Like there are a lot of great companies in cybersecurity, including some pretty big ones, that like just have not had people cover them at the level of depth that I think that I think are worth. And that was the first time I really did that. Like, I would say that was my first really serious attempt at like taking one company and really going, super deep on it. But that article was huge. I mean, I heard from all corners of the internet on that one, including people who I never would have expected to read my stuff.
And the funny thing is, if things are going well for you as a founder, you don't really need all that recognition anyway, because you have revenue, you have customers, you're just scaling your go to market, and just scaling the revenue from there. And the other aspect that you write a lot about is the earnings transcripts. And one of the reasons I gravitate towards your writing is, if some of the analysis that you write, especially in the space that I worked in, if I wrote it, it would be, man, I mean, this guy's an insider. He knows about these companies. He's worked at these companies. No big deal. But you write with the same level of clarity as an outsider, with the brutality of like a grand chess master. There is a level of honesty in there. When I read it, it rings true, especially for the companies that I've been at. And I'm like, how does like Cole write so clearly? And that's why I trust the other writings that you do, because if you do well in the space that at least I claim to understand really well, and you write really well on those topics, then it's a good proxy that he probably writes really well on the other topics that I don't understand really well as well.
Yeah. So I definitely try to, as far as like scope of coverage, I mean, I tend to focus mostly on like the later stage, or the public,
Yeah.
public cybersecurity companies, like later stage, well-funded companies that are pretty widely known. And then, I do definitely spend some time covering startups, but it tends to be like markets of startups. So, once in a while there will be one that is really interesting that I just cover on its own. But like, on average, it's probably like a group of startups in, an emerging industry, or one that I can definitely see a lot of activity around, and try to draw the strategic themes from there. I think on the approach part, like, on one hand, I'm Midwestern, right? And so Midwestern people are pretty polite. I've grown up in the Midwest for the whole time, my entire life. And so Minnesota is the capital of passive aggression. There's probably some of that I've channeled. Uh, so it's not, I try not to be overly critical, right? So I don't want to go out and just
You're very
shred
honest.
company.
You're very honest in your writing. You say it.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line between being critical and being honest, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't want to be critical just for the sake of being critical. And, there are probably times where, like, privately I would criticize something, but like, I'm just not going to do that in public, because I don't want to intentionally eviscerate a company just because I can, right? But at the same time, like, I think there's the other end of the spectrum is like, I can talk to you positively about something and make something look better than what it should. I'm probably guilty as charged of that, but I would much rather sit on that side than like being critical just for the sake of getting views. I think in the middle, though, and what you're getting at is like, there's this level of intellectual honesty in there where, and I think if you were to just reflect more broadly on strategy, right? Like, the only way to be good at strategy is to be brutally honest. Like, even if the final product doesn't come out that way, like, the thinking behind it needs to be brutally honest, right? It's really hard to do strategy well if you're lying to yourself or your client, right? And so that's where it has to be, is just the recognition and the maturity to know, like, hey, this is going really well, here's why, or hey, this is not going very well, and here's why. And then I can kind of craft the message around that, right? But sometimes in analysis, like, it has to be blunt. It has to just be like, look, I don't think this is working, or I don't think this is going to work. And that's some of the responsibility that I have, is like, people take what I say seriously, good and bad, and so I cannot put lipstick on a pig, so to speak, when I shouldn't.
Let's switch gears. I want to talk about the state of the union for cybersecurity media. My sense is a lot of it is pay for play. So as a result of it, you never know what is true, what is not true. And someone like you shows up with a dose of honesty. It pulls the readers towards that kind of media in terms of trust, honesty, rigor in the research, and so on. What do you think is is good or bad with the current state of the union for cybersecurity media?
I think in some ways it's never been better and never been worse. And I know that might be a contradiction. I think never been worse is probably along the lines of what you're saying, right? And I think that goes up and down, right? I mean, I'm certainly not in the, big analyst firm, Gartner, Forrester are going to die camp. Like, they'll be around forever. They serve their purpose. They do what they do fairly well. I mean, the stock price is what it is, and I think they have challenges, but like, they're resilient businesses. They've been around for a long time. They'll figure it out. So, I think they have their role, right? And yeah, I mean, I can understand why people, have distrust in the media, and why or the cybersecurity media, and like, why some of the pay for play aspects of both large and small firms can be challenging to navigate. The thing that I think is good, though, and again, this is just me kind of reflecting on my own 5-year journey as a independent person. I think 5 years ago, when I was starting this, it was kind of just starting to become possible to do this as an independent discipline, right? Like, there really weren't, there were some people, I guess. I mean, you have the OG people like Richard Steinen, who have been out here doing this for a long time, but for the rest of us mortals, it was kind of a new thing. And so that was kind of a small bet that I took at the beginning of this, was like, hey, I think through the combination of the publishing platforms out there, little did I know, like, AI would come later that would be a lot more helpful. And I think more just the climate. I mean, I think my sense was just people were more receptive to listening to independent people than they ever really had been before. So, I think that's been really good. It's been an amazing journey for me to be able to be independent since day one. I've had the opportunity to write about a lot of things I really like. I have amazing clients. Like, it all just works. And like, there's a small cohort of like my peer group, Chris Hughes, Ross Halluke, Francis Odom, James Verhode, like you could name a few other people who have all, Mike Prevet, who have all kind of started around the same time and have all been able to do, their part of it. And so I think that's cool where like the punchline is like, it can all coexist. I think it's really neat where like none of us are sitting here trying to take down Gartner. Like that's not what this is. It's like there's just more room in the industry for more voices, and I think people like to hear from that. I think that's been a fun thing.
Follow-up to that is, do you think these hefty fees are sustainable in the age of AI? If this high quality work gets done by independent media, you're one of the people leading the charge on that. Do you think these hefty fees are sustainable given the amount of research AI agents can do, AI analysts can do for you, or does it not matter?
I think the people who I think it's kind of Gartner's kind of like an annuity, right? And if by hefty fees we're referencing like the original old school analyst firms, I think it's going to continue to exist. I mean, is their business going to grow like wildfire? I don't think so. I mean, it might, even slowly decay, but I think it's always going to be around. I think no matter which size of firm you're looking at, as a person who's spent a lot of time doing all kinds of research, including AI research, for my own work, the one thing that's always going to matter, or at least will matter for a while, that I think may always be durable is human judgment, right? I'm still pretty surprised by how often even, frontier AI and or, agent tooling gives me back something that's wrong. like, and for a person who has a really high quality bar, or at least enough intuition to know like, hey, this isn't quite right. I'm surprised at how often it's wrong. Like nothing will teach you, nothing will be more eye-opening about how wrong these things can be when they go out and find my own research that I did on something and they'll reference like a strategy security post. And it'll refer like this happens with public companies all the time. That's like oddly, I mean, I've written about it. I've become sort of like a semi go-to person in aspects of that. Like I'll be doing public company research and it will return my own result back to me, not knowing that I wrote it. And I'll be like, oh, this was wrong, or this is like outdated. It has changed, and I should really go back and clean that up. Or like, oh, it would have been nice to add this as well. So it's stuff like that that makes you realize pretty quickly that like, yeah, these things are really good and they're fun and I love them and I would use them all day long. But like, you got to have a human with some judgment on the other side of that, or you're going to go sideways pretty.
Have the new tools changed the way you work? Has it resulted in creating more work, or has it resulted in doing much more impactful work for you?
I'm still working harder than ever. Like they definitely save time on a lot of things, but they, don't save time on other things. I think the way that I would put it is like, there were probably aspects of manual research gathering that I was doing at the beginning of this that like aren't really valuable for me to do. Like my unique judgment is not around gathering research. It's probably like steps after that. In some ways, they've probably improved that, where like they can take a broader swipe faster. And like I have also learned how to direct, deep research to be able to find things or filter things better than what I could have, or, they would undirected. So I think in that sense, it's been really good, or that's taken away some work. But I think the flip side of it is it's also opened up some possibilities that were never there before. Like there are some things that I would code or things that I would analyze or pieces that I would write now. A good example, just to put a practical thing behind this, is I did this piece at like when DOGE was kind of kicking in and there were a lot of concerns in the industry around, funding cuts and what's going to happen, what's the trickle effect of that going to be in cybersecurity. I realized that nobody had really unpacked like that entire funding tree and like how things flow down. And you look into that a little bit and it's like, oh, this is pretty complicated. And it actually like takes a little bit of thought to figure out what might happen there. And so I didn't really know a lot about this. I mean, I've worked like in the public sector a little bit. I would never consider myself to be an expert. I mean, certainly not at like a Chris Hughes or somebody like that would be. But I just realized, hey, I think I could actually probably figure this out. It's just sort of a blood, sweat, and tears thing where if I just, pound on deep research for a couple of weeks, it'll probably give me back something pretty sensical. And, and it did. And so I did this entire like, mapping of like where a lot of funding is coming from different parts of the federal government and, put out a fairly well-regarded research product. Like, but when Brian Krebs was chiming in on it, I was like, okay, we did something here that, that people thought was good.
So how do you know something has gone viral?
I mean, one example, like when Nikesh Arora chimes in on something that I've written, which has happened 4 or 5 times now. So it's, he's not afraid to engage with anybody, including the independent people. I will say, I think I've got a pretty good batting average on that so far. I'm probably 3 for 4, 4 for 5 on him chiming in and thanking me instead of him chiming in and trying to rip me apart. But that's when is when you've got like well-known figures in the industry chiming.
And the one thing I like about your writing is you're not in this ambulance chasing mode. There are two modes, at least from the way you break into my feed is one is you write about areas that you have competency in. So something, an area that you know really well about, and you are very methodical in choosing about writing about them. And second, the pieces that come through in my feed at least are when you don't know anything about it and you do a deep research. You go in like the DOGE thing. You didn't know a lot about, but then you take the time, the blood, sweat, and tears, and then you go deep into that topic, write about, and you add your spin to it, your analysis to it, your research to it, and then the end product really shines through.
Yeah, I have a pretty high bar for quality in general. I mean, that's something that I've always held in high regard.
I mean, as an independent writer, you have to have a very high bar.
You don't have to. I mean, a lot of what you see, I mean, that's probably one of the things that, if you were back to your criticism of like things have never been worse, right? Like anybody can write things on the internet now, right? And they do sometimes. And so, I think that's strategically and just personally, I mean, again, this is a personality trait, not necessarily a strategy. It just translated into that. But like, I think when you've been through the PwC boot camp, so to speak, you have a different appreciation for what like an extremely high level of quality is. And then I think I'm also, my mom would say that I'm a perfectionist. And so I think you put those two things together and like, that's what I've always tried to do. And so that's probably a feature and a bug. I would say like what I write, sometimes I get it wrong. I mean, and I've been called on that before, it happens, but like what I write, I try to produce at like a pretty high level of quality. But like the flip side of that is there's probably things that I should or could write about that I just don't, either because I don't feel like I know enough about it just yet, or I just haven't had the time yet to put in the research to be able to hit a point where I feel like I should write about it. That's what I'm trying to work on now is like, can AI, can experience, can like combination of several factors like get me to the place where I can increase the volume or increase the breadth like just a little bit? I think that would be a good place.
I'm curious, do you strive for a unique perspective? Like, something like, I don't know if you have read about the glasswing thing or the mythos, everyone has opinions. Everyone has like a lot of opinions when you see something like that blowing up, do you strive for a unique perspective? And if you have one, you come and write about it, or you just leave it at that? If there is nothing new you can add to the conversation, you just leave it. Does that play into your thinking as you're thinking to write about some of these things?
That's something I debate every day with whether I cover, the news or whether I cover something that's a little bit more evergreen and durable. I mean, the glasswing thing's a pretty good example, right? Like that one I did decide that I was going to chime in on. Sometimes I just will keep that on my shoulder or, sit it out. But, I don't want to sit everything out either, right? I mean, I don't think I think there's times where I feel like I should chime in and people are expecting me to, and they want my perspective. And so I do feel some obligation to do that. But like, there are other cases where it's like, hey, there are other people who are better off covering this one than me. The glasswing one is probably an example where it didn't work out very well. Like I debated whether I should chime in at all. I kind of convinced myself to do it. I ended up writing by my standard would be like a fairly mid analysis of it, or I think I took a little bit like the wrong approach of the marketing partnership aspect of it. And when, the vibe of the industry was clearly against the marketing aspect of it, and I should have known better. And so I didn't really get blasted, but it wasn't really a good post either from a performance standpoint. So, I don't know. You got to pick and choose, and it's okay.
I get it. One of the reasons you started Strategy of Security is to cover the commercial side of cybersecurity. You wanted to marry the commercial to the business and the tech side to bring in that complete analysis in Strategy of Security. So I want to switch gears into talking about the commercial realities of cybersecurity. My question is like, what is some of the biggest mistakes like early stage founders make when they're trying to navigate the cybersecurity ecosystem from your point of view?
Yeah, this is like somewhat drawing back to things I alluded to in the earlier part of the discussion around, the ecosystem and like my own journey as a solopreneur, as an entrepreneur. Like I see a lot of companies, right? I mean, my job is to sit here, and although I focus on some of the later stage, like I see a lot of companies, and especially in some of my client work, especially for M&A, I look at a lot of companies. And so what worries me all the time is when I start to see a lot of companies in one space, just
Yeah.
because it just because that seems to be like a space that either there was a reasonably successful exit and then people will say, oh, well, there can be another successful exit, or they take that as signal and, then they want to get into it. Or, maybe worse yet is, hey, I'm not really a cybersecurity person, but cybersecurity seems like a really hot industry. I'm going to go do a cybersecurity startup. Uh, I think that's really hard. I mean, again, I think it's so hard to start a startup anyway. And I think that walking into it with things working against you, like, oh, I don't have that much domain knowledge, or hey, I worked in cybersecurity, but it was really like this one, maybe I was an identity person, but I'm going to start a vulnerability management startup. Like, you probably shouldn't. I mean, I'm sure there's cases where it's worked out that way. And it's not to say that you have to be an absolute insider to be able to do this. But um, I do think if it's just, hey, I want to start a startup and then I'm going to figure that out later, that's probably a tough way to do it.
Do you see like an unhealthy pattern? You talked about this the VCs backing the same types of companies in a category. Do you see that there is an unhealthy pattern where the well-funded VCs are jumping into the market, spending $2 to gain $1? How does that how does that impact the cybersecurity market from the way you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I don't even know what the term is. I mean, there probably is a term and I'm probably not using the right one, but like blitzscaling for cybersecurity, right? Where it's just, we're gonna, I mean, not to point fingers at Wiz, but like to follow kind of a Wiz-like model, or, models from like other parts of the tech ecosystem where it's, hey, there's this market that is going to be really hot, and like we're going to just pour a ton of money into it, and we're going to go, buy customers, or, even jump into like shady aspects of customer acquisition where, I'm going to buy them vacations or whatever it takes to be able to get a customer. It's, can you win that way? Probably. Are you playing with fire? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't match my definition of like what a good, durable business is. And I think that anytime that happens, it's definitely concerning. I mean, again, like you can probably get away with it, but is that healthy? I don't think so. I'm much more of a fan, and I try to cover like companies that are very durable, like the 1Passwords of the world, or companies like that who have, gone through this very long journey, to get to where they are. And not that growing fast is the problem. I mean, there are companies that, that just find fit right away and they do really well, right? But like, I just think when you're trying to artificially do that by throwing money at the problem and like crossing boundaries, I think that's not good for us.
There are two ways to look at it. One is there is an influx of new companies trying to gain market share, ride the AI wave, and so on. And the second way to look at this is, and there is a lot of fear around this, there is a lot of FUD around this. Well, all these cybersecurity companies are going to die. Was the one narrative is the future is so good, you don't have to work anymore. Elon Musk is, the work will be optional. Like work will be optional, and the second narrative is all these companies are going to die. Give the money back to the shareholders. Shut them down. Where do you land on these on these two diverging points of views?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably in this interesting position where like I've been doing this for long enough to, not be a curmudgeon, but at least like remember what it was like or seen enough things to be skeptical. But then I'm also young enough where I'm like using all this stuff and like really optimistic about the future. And so it's an interesting existence. It's an interesting time to be alive for sure. I'm not in the camp at all of like AI is going to kill these cybersecurity companies. I mean, like, come on.
Not even CrowdStrike.
CrowdStrike's an amazing business. Palo Alto Networks is an amazing business. I don't know. I mean, there's life cycles of companies. I mean, the names may change, but like, no, cybersecurity as an industry is not going away. I mean, I think there are things that are going to change. Like our businesses certainly have to adapt. You can even see it with CrowdStrike. Like there were endpoint security companies before CrowdStrike, but CrowdStrike brought cybersecurity to the cloud, and that was kind of their core innovation, or but like George Person knew what he was doing. Like that was very intentional, and he had been sitting there waiting for that opportunity for a while, and built the company that he wanted to build, and and it worked out. But like no, AI isn't going to kill all these cybersecurity companies. Like if you tie this back to a much broader trend, very long discussion short, any era of technology that has happened, like you can follow Mary Meeker's pattern all the way through. She's kind of the famous VC that characterizes these technology eras, like, and even before what she would have covered, like you just see that security was always an afterthought, right? And sometimes it took decades for security to enter the equation.
In AI, security is an afterthought. Now everyone is talking about GRC for AI, visibility into AI. What are these agents doing? Every aspect of that, I don't think security has been thought through, and now everyone is thinking about security for AI as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cycle is getting tighter. Like you could probably make the argument a little bit more recently, like mobile kind of got addressed right away. There were really never like a huge exit in mobile that came out of that. It was a little bit tighter. Is AI perfect at security? I mean, no, like Anthropic just had two self-inflicted problems last week. So there's definitely work to be done there, and their incentives are still aligned towards competing and building frontier AI and all of that. So I would say they're a little bit more mindful of security than they ever have been, but like the surface area of that is also way wider too. I mean, there's so much more, and it's a much bigger shift of a paradigm that I think there's going to be plenty. And I think the last point on this too is like, even if they do get good at security, right? Like you can kind of trace this back to even like cloud security or endpoint security or whatever. Like, guess what? Microsoft eventually got into the endpoint security market and has a multi-billion-dollar business there. Like, all of the major cloud providers have cloud security businesses. Like, by them getting in that market, did they just wipe out everybody else? That was like a pure play cybersecurity company in that space? No. Like, they're going to get their pound of flesh, but they're not going to wipe everybody.
What class of companies will die because of AI? What categories in this is like, what would be the form of those companies that fail to innovate will die in the age of AI?
I'll give like a very like paradigm based answer on that. I think is the best prescriptive answer I can give there. Like, I think if you just had a good SaaS company and then you just say we're going to leave it at that, right? Like we're not going to really bake AI into the product, or if we do, it's going to be pretty mid AI. Like, yeah, our chatbot is super innovative, or, our Copilot is very innovative. Like, then I think you're probably in trouble, right? I think if you just kind of sit on what you did, or I don't know, maybe this will happen with some of the PE backed companies that are trying to cut costs, but like, I think if you don't really take AI seriously, if you don't have the imagination to think like, what would be different about my product, and how would my customers use it if I had a very advanced AI. This is kind of along Jason Lemkin, like Sasser thinking in this category that I've always thought is really good. Of just, you're probably better off trying to build. You're better off trying to build the best agent in your space within your existing company and within your existing customer base. Like, that is a huge advantage versus like trying to start that from scratch. Of course, there will be companies who will be started from scratch. I hope yours is one of them that, felt like it was better to be outside of the space that they were in, and the companies that are established there, like, you just got to be on the outside and rebuild from scratch. But I think that a lot of the companies in cybersecurity that do well are going to like have a very serious reinvention and come out way better.
Yeah.
On.
And then we talked about companies dying in AI. I'm also seeing a lot of careers dying in AI. So what do you think is the future? What do you think is the future of cybersecurity professional in the age of AI?
I think it leads you to be a little bit more of a generalist, I think. I mean, not that there's no room for specialists, but I'm sort of self-reflecting here and answering my own, career evolution in some ways. Like, I've just always been a generalist. I'm interested in a lot of things in cybersecurity. I have some domain expertise, but I'm interested in things outside of that, or at least like broader tech and business and strategy. And so I feel like I've never been better. Like I've never had more fun doing what I'm doing. Like I just thoroughly enjoy this, and I've probably never done better work. And I hope that it continues to get better because of AI, right? But it's been like a very serious reinvention. Even dating back to like when I started this and reflecting, and then what AI has allowed me to do since then. Like you kind of have to keep reinventing yourself. I mean, I don't mean to sound like trite about that, but I think that if you just kind of accept the reality of like this frontier AI is going to keep getting better, and like the tools are going to change week by week, and I'm just going to have to continuously reinvent who I am and what I do as a professional, like you're gonna do great. like you get more leverage by the week. Like everything just keeps getting better. Like what you can do more is better. What you don't like, you can get rid of. Like it's amazing existence. But I think if unfortunately from my point of view anyway, like we do have this camp in the industry of like AI is terrible and it should go away and it needs to be regulated and I'm not going to use it and like it's completely useless and like I don't know about that either. Like there's been enough tech trends that I've lived through to like, okay, yeah, this was a nothing burger and they really were pretty useless, or at least they didn't match the hype. Like if you use frontier AI and agents for like 24 hours and you don't see how this makes the world meaningfully different, I don't know what you're doing. It's so much fun. It's like my work is different since January 2026. I've completely reinvented the way that I work.
How?
And I probably reinvented it like before that, right?
What changed in January 2026?
I don't do anything without an agent anymore. Like almost nothing.
What's your go-to agent?
I kind of like have OpenClaw Plus at this point. Like you could look at that as like an aggregator of several different tools underneath that, so that being like coding agents and, Perplexity Computer turns out to be really cool. Like that does some good research and just, you kind of have to insulate yourself against that, right? Like on one hand, some of the, some like Claude Code has been my go-to for a long time. Like I really like that as a tool and it's a really good one, but like there's always new stuff that comes out too. And so without having to like reinvent your stack all the time, it was nice to be able to have this like aggregation layer that at least allows me some level of consistency, but then, be able to try and like swap different parts underneath it as well.
Super interesting. Cole, this has been an amazing, amazing interview. You're way too generous with your time. Your insights are fascinating. What's next for Cole? What's the next big thing that is dropping from Cole Grolmus?
Sleep. Definitely the next big thing will be much more thought out because I will have slept much better because the baby is closer to making it through the night. But no, I mean, I'm sort of serious about that. That definitely would help my cause. But, I mean, I think I think it's like an amazing time to be alive. Like I've been gushing about here. Like I have never had more fun at work and I've been doing tech for fun since I was like 12 or younger. I think never been a better time to be doing this, albeit in like a terrifying year. I think we're also in an era that we're all going to reflect very fondly on and be like, wow, this was like a really amazing time to be working in. And I try to appreciate that. Like, again, I've done this long enough that I think I remember what it was like before then. My kids are just going to take this for granted and they're never going to realize the era that, that we grew up in. So I'm trying to enjoy it and but I'm also hopeful like that I have a long time to be able to continue.
Awesome. Cole, thank you for joining me on the series. This was an amazing interview. Let's check back in a year from now and see how much you've progressed with your AI agents.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you.
Thank you.